Welcome back. This week, economic growth takes center stage, with that being the U.S. Set to update the market with fourth quarter GDP numbers. Also having business in Germany urging new leadership to tackle economic growth. We do have Scope Markets' Chief Market Analyst Joshua Mahony joining us for a preview of the economic week ahead globally. Thank you so much for your time, Joshua. Let's actually start off there in Germany because quite a big change as they will soon be getting a new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, replacing Olaf Scholz, of course, after the Christian Alliance has won the majority of votes in Germany's election. What does this shift mean for Germany?
Well, I mean, this is a new start, certainly coming at a key time. There's talks of our major ally at the other side of the Atlantic, essentially caring little for that alliance. And instead, it feels like Europe is going to have to start batting for itself. He has already said, within his victory speech, that we need to see greater independence away from the likes of the US. And so he has a job on his hands. Now, certainly it's notable that the German economy took a turn south at the moment that we saw the Russia-Ukraine war kick off, in part because Germany is quite used to getting cheap energy from Russia. And with that line being increasingly cut off, their sort of manufacturing and industrial base has really been hit hard. So the ability to be able to kickstart the economy is going to be key. But quite frankly, the ability for Donald Trump to bring an end to that Russia-Ukraine war could actually be the thing that gives the German economy a sort of shot in the arm, so to speak.
And I'm actually just wondering, I mean, of course, we know the kind of macroeconomic points now he's talking about, the fact that the Eurozone really needs to shift away from a dependence on the US. But of course, we know the politics that have played out in Germany, particularly in terms of the composition of the government. What task lies ahead for Friedrich Merz right now in terms of getting a coalition government together?
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, the big question here wasn't necessarily whether they were going to win so much, because in actual fact, they underperformed expectations. But the question mark was really around how the far right were going to gain power, and they doubled the vote with around 20% of the vote, the AfD. Now, there's not going to be a coalition with them. Instead, they're going to form a coalition, most likely with the outgoing party that's going to be more moderate in nature. But something that we're seeing here in the UK as well is when you see the growth in the vote of, say, the Reform Party here in the UK or the AfD over in Germany, by and large, these more centralist sort of parties end up trying to take some of those voters back by taking a little bit more of a hardline stance. So it'll be very interesting to see, even if they do find a coalition, whether it is a little bit more right-leaning just because of the sheer number of votes that have been moved towards the AfD.
All right. Well, let's cross on over to the U.S., talking about, global economics under the Trump era. But, I mean, still a lot of people saying that the U.S., even with the fragmentation that we are seeing in the global economy, that the U.S. Is still going to continue to see strong growth. But actually, that wasn't the sentiment that we saw, particularly with investors on a Friday, as the stock markets sold off quite a bit because of worries over economic growth. We do have GDP coming out for the fourth quarter in the US this week. Just that nervousness that we saw last week, could it just have been a knee-jerk reaction for an economy that is still fine?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't necessarily worry too much about growth in the US because, quite frankly, there's going to be enough countries that sort of bend over backwards to strike a deal with the US to try and stave off tariffs. And we've seen it just today with Apple. Apple now saying, oh, we're going to hire 20,000 more people in the US, and everyone's trying to do their best to make sure that they aren't hit by some of these tariffs. So the GDP revision that we're seeing, because it's the second release this time around, I don't necessarily think will be the big mover. I think the big concern at the moment is inflation. On Friday, like you alluded to, we saw the Michigan consumer confidence figure that declined, but the key thing here is that we saw a rise in terms of the 5-year inflation expectations figure up to the highest reading since 1995, and that comes leading into this week where we see the core PCE price index figure from the US. That is going to be the big ticket economic release of the week. And if you look at the core PCE against the core CPI has surged massively over the past 6 months. Core PCE hasn't, so that is kind of the last bastion bastion in terms of providing an argument for the Federal Reserve to be able to cut interest rates. If we start to see that rise, which we're expecting 0.4, which would be the highest figure in a year, then that again starts to undermine the idea that the Federal Reserve is going to cut anytime soon.
Also coming up in earnings in the US is Nvidia earnings. That's going to be quite an interesting one. Of course, we know that the company has really become a benchmark for investor sentiment in the broader market. What will inform the direction of investors' money on Nvidia on Wednesday?
Yeah, it's a funny one because we've been we're seeing widespread selling pressure across those MAG 7 names. People calling them the LAG 7 now. In actual fact, over the course of the past month, we've only seen 2 out of the 7 actually gaining ground. Nvidia down roughly 9% over that period. There's been question marks about how quickly they can sort of manufacture the new Blackwell chip, and so the supply and demand of those chips will be key going forward. Of course, everyone really wants to know what the outlook is in terms of demand going forward. Now that we've heard from the DeepSeek news over in China, people start questioning whether there is a need or a desire for people to spend the huge amounts that they have been on these really high-end chips, if they could potentially do the same job or a similar job on a much sort of lower budget. So the outlook is going to be as important as the demand picture really for the time being, because it's only recently that we've seen that DeepSeek news.
All right. Well, definitely we'll be sifting through those on Wednesday. But thank you so much for your time, Joshua. Really appreciate it. That was Joshua Mahony, Chief Market Analyst for Scope Markets, with the Global Economic Week ahead.